name's Zack Smith. I'm a farmer from about 60 miles south of here. Buffalo Center, Iowa is where I'm from. And I got asked to come to this event about 2 months ago when after I'd spoken at another event with Tom Cotter here from Minnesota. And he saw a presentation I gave on something that I've been working on for the last 5 years called the stock cropper. Is anybody here familiar with the stock croppers? Oh, so there. Okay, well, I'm going to really disappoint you because I'm really not going to talk that much about it today, okay? But if you come and give me a whiskey ticket here in a couple hours, I'll open up like a Jack in the Box. So, but the reason that I made the decision not to talk about, one of the reasons I've been talking about it for 4 years and I wanted to have a different deck to talk with this winter. And the other reason is I feel like that concept that some of you are familiar with, if you're not familiar with it, I guess I'll back up and say stock cropper is an innovative system that actually myself and the two gentlemen that are sitting there at that table that don't want to acknowledge their presence, Sheldon and Lance, that we came up with an idea to try to solve the problem of trying to figure out how to integrate livestock back into crop fields. And so it's, I guess, a picture right here. These are one of the autonomous livestock barns that we put into a strip intercrop field. And I've got a whole hour deck where I can talk about that. But the reason I decided to go a different route is that after working on it for 5 years, I've kind of come to the conclusion is that we're about 15 to probably 20 or 30 years ahead of our time for where that type of a thing could actually come to fruition. If you were sitting in Adam Lash's presentation, there is opportunity coming down the pipe, but there's a lot of things that stand in the way for a truly regenerative, locally driven food system to come into place. And so what I thought about doing today is putting together a presentation that I've actually wanted to make for a while to talk about the general farming apparatus with corn and soybean production as it sits. And instead of trying to go from what conventional agriculture is today to Joel Salatin across the land, which would be phenomenal, it realistically isn't going to happen in the next 3 clicks. And so what are some of the things that we can do to get us there quicker and to get farmers more in tune? Everybody in this meeting room is already in tune. We're not the ones that need to be sold here. It's the rest of the general public that really has to come along for the ride. So the presentation I put together, the first part's aimed at people that are maybe newbies. I don't know if there's many newbies in that part. It's mainly my background stuff to really kind of how I got to this spot. And then the second half is going to be some very strong opinions that I have, and I'm hoping it spices things up and we can get some good conversation about policy development to get the type of things that are talked about today more widespread in mass. So we'll get started. So 5 principles of regen ag context is the 6th, so this is my context. Raised on a family farm, like I said, 60 miles south of here. Corn and soybeans has been my background. We have had, when I was a kid, we had set aside and some oats, but never a third crop really. We did have pork, farrow to finish operation. Up until the early 90s and middle school is when my dad got out. He saw the vertically integrated model coming in central Iowa and he said no thanks. And because he made that decision is why I get to farm today, because we likely would not have survived. We were just about ready to expand ahead of the 1998 collapse of the hog market, and thankfully we didn't. Otherwise I might not be here doing this today. So I was the oldest of 5 kids. My baby brother is 17 years younger than me, so I wanted to come back to the farm, but when he came into our lives when I was a junior in high school, I figured out that farming wasn't probably going to be the fit. So I went to Iowa State and got a BS in agronomy and studied down there till 2002, graduated. And then essentially for the last 15 to 20 years, I've spent my life in ag retail. That's where I kind of cut my teeth. I worked right out of school for what now is known as New Tech Seed Company. And I worked for a large independent ag chem retailer called Osmus Farm Supply, and people in this geography may recognize that name. And then in 2015, I had the chance to go out and hang out my own shingle and take over a Pioneer seed business. And I took that along with the experience I had. I added chemical and fertility consulting. I also sold cover crops and soil sampling. I was kind of your average retail corner shop. Along the way, I started farming in 2010. Like I said, I was 17 when my brother was born. So when he was in about 8th grade and the ethanol boom hit, my dad decided that he was getting closer to retirement and there was enough room for me to have opportunity. So I started crop sharing in 80 with him in 2010. Dad ended up retiring in 13. And in 2022, I actually became a full-time farmer for the first time. A couple things had happened that spurred that along. One of the things was the initiation of this stock cropper project that some of you have heard of. We started that in 2020. That needed more oxygen to breathe. The second thing was I was getting incredibly burned out from being a single-man operation that was farming, running a seed, chemical, fertility, cover crop, and soil sampling business, but just with essentially one person and full-time help. And then the last thing was was lucky enough to have a customer come up to me unsolicited and gave me an opportunity to take over their family farm operation. And I didn't see that coming. I kind of figured I would just be a pioneer dealer and an agronomist the rest of my life. But you never know what life's going to throw at you, and so I decided to retire from a pioneer business at the age of 42. Probably one of the dumbest financial decisions I've ever made in my life, especially now with staring the prospects of commodity prices in the face. But I've been incredibly lucky in the timing of a lot of the decisions that have put me in the position that I'm at today, and I'm really grateful for all of the opportunities. So that's my context. I'm also married and have two daughters in college at Iowa State. And I forgot to mention the Iowa State Cyclones are 10-2 along with the Minnesota Vikings. And what a time to be alive. That's never happened before. So this is my map dot where I'm at. You can see this. I'm pretty much straight south of Mankato in northern Winnebago County, about 2.5 hours to Des Moines and 2 hours to the cities. So we were actually at the Vikings game on Sunday, and that was a hoot. But this is where I'm at to give you some context there. So the farm I grew up on had nothing to do with soil conservation or any of this stuff. This was all really foreign to me until about, I think it was 2006 or 7 when there was, does anybody know the website New Ag Talk? Is anybody on that? If you're a farmer, a lot of people are. I came across this concept called strip till, and there was a guy by the name of, his moniker on there was Jim at Dawn, but it was Jim Bassett, one of the guys that started Dawn Equipment Company. And he had this strip till bar that I thought was fascinating, and I was really, really interested in the concept. As an agronomist, I like the idea of the efficiency of eliminating machinery, minimizing tillage, minimizing erosion risk, all of those things, water infiltration, just a lot of things that made sense to me as an agronomist, and especially as an agronomist that wanted to eventually farm someday and probably going to be working off the farm. I needed something to make me efficient. And so that was really what got me in like 2007, 2008 into that space. Thank you, Tom, appreciate that. 2007, 2008. Yeah, and what I was going to say is that at that point, there were no soil health or regen ag conferences. They didn't exist. The first conference I remember going to in this space was the Conservation Tillage Conference, but soil health really hadn't become a thing at that point. And so that really, I think, happened about five years later. So I was really into this, and I wanted to get my dad to do it, but I really didn't know how to make that happen. And so I met this guy here who's sitting in the back of the room, Sheldon Stevemer. He farms just south of Mankato here. And I had a guy that I worked with that knew Sheldon, and he said, this guy strip tills, he's not too far away. And so I asked, well, could I meet him? And so I went up and I hopped in the cab with Sheldon on a fateful night in, I think, 2008 or 9. And he taught me and shared his experience with kind of what he learned and kind of inspired me to want to pursue it further. But in most farming situations, when you farm with your dad, this is my dad here sitting with me at one of our stock cropper field days a couple years ago. There's a generational divide because my dad was not interested in change. He was approaching retirement. He did not like technology. We did have auto steer, but he absolutely hated it. He was kind of an old soul. And we practiced a lot of conventional tillage. I loved plowing as a kid. I did more moldboard plowing than most people my age for sure, but I loved turning stuff black. So we had definitely kind of that culture. And Dad really didn't see a reason to change. And I banged on him pretty hard to try to do so. And actually, strip till got used on my 30th birthday party, my surprise party. The way they got me away from the house was my dad baited me and said, hey, I'm thinking about this strip till thing again. I want to go look at this with you. And I just had this thought. And so that's how they got me away so they could get the house ready for my 30th, was baiting me with strip till. So anyway, 2 years into me farming, I had a come to Jesus moment where I said, I want to do this, and I'm not going to wait for my mom and dad to make the decision. My dad was 60 at the time. We had a come to Jesus meeting on the porch on a July afternoon in 2011, and I said, I'm going to go buy a strip-till barn. I'm going to start farming this way, either with or without you. And it was kind of a coup d'etat. My parents were not happy with me at all. There were tears, there was yelling. But I went and did that. And to my parents' credit, a couple days later, they came back to me and said, if you're this passionate about making this type of change and this is how you want to farm, we'll give you some rope to hang yourself with and we'll support you. And we're going to buy a Montag fertilizer cart to put behind your rig and RTK. And that was how the experiment started. So this is my dad and I in the fall of 2011, standing on some of the first strips that we made on some bean stubble. That first year, Dad gave me a couple 80s of bean stubble to try it on. And then he said, if this is going to work, we have to be able to grow corn on corn, because we're growing a lot of corn. That was our rotation, was 2/3, 1/3 at the time. So he gave me 15 acres out of an 80-acre field to experiment and prove that this system was going to be worth it. And so I stripped it in the fall of 11, and then in the spring of the 12. So the year of 12 was a drought, right? It was a dry year. But that year we went in and I should back up and say in the fall of 11, I put on anhydrous in the strip, dry fertilizer. The next spring I came back, I had some auto-steer issues, so I refreshed the strips. Dad's comparison was fall plowing, spring field cultivating and leveling, anhydrous, field cultivate, plant. That was his program, and we had that side by side. So one of the first differences we saw with that, with difference in management, was we had terrible dust storms the first couple weeks of the growing season when the corn came out of the ground. And there was one that was so bad, I came to the field to look at the comparison strip, and my dad's corn was literally sawed off at the ground level. The wind had blown so badly, and right to the line where I had the residue that protected the saltation of things blowing across. My corn was still probably about 90% intact. It wasn't perfect, but it was a heck of a lot in better shape. And that was kind of the first of what was to come in the side-by-side comparison of the advantages to doing things differently. And I had my dad's attention. But he said, looks are one thing, and the only thing that matters is how it weighs up in the fall. And so we took it to yield in the fall, and my dad was in the catch cart. I was in the combine. We combined my side first, and I kind of knew what I had to go off of. And then we did Dad's, and we had 30-foot pass by 30-foot pass, and we weighed those rounds up. And when I got done augering into my dad after our comparison, I got out of the combine and I trotted over to the tractor and up into the cab with him, and he wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the scale on the grain cart, and he wouldn't acknowledge me. And you never talk first in a showdown like that. So I just sat there in silence and waited. And I'll never forget the words that he said next. Without even looking at me, he's still looking at the scale, he said, "Wipe that goddamn smile off your face." And then he turned to look at me, he said, "I've been doing it wrong for the last 40 years. And we're going to change and go a different direction and try this a little bit more." So the next year was 2013. There was the prevent plant year, especially in northern Iowa. And this is where we first got exposure to cover crops by accident. We declared prevent plant on 150 acres, and we made the decision to pattern tile a good chunk of the ground at that point, and then we went out and planted a 6-way cover crop mix. Nobody in northern Iowa had ever planted a cover crop before that year. But we went out and we drilled this the end of July. We didn't know how we were supposed to manage it, but my plan was I'm going to let this stuff turn into a salad, and I'm going to go out and strip till it in October. Now, all the neighbors did this, and they let it grow for about a month, and they were going to have a seizure because they didn't know how that was going to get through the corn planter the next year. So they were out there with rippers and discs and trying to annihilate it Labor Day weekend. I was the only idiot in the county to let the shit grow this big. And it was knee-high to waist-high at that point when I went out and stripped it. And there was so much residue, I couldn't see my strips behind me. I couldn't even get traction because the tillage radish grease was greasing my tires so much I couldn't hardly get up the hills. And I really didn't know how it was going to turn out, but like a lot of things in this journey, if you just have a little bit of faith and believe in what you're doing, it's kind of amazing what starts to happen. And what happened was, once it froze hard, all of that vegetation disintegrated, and the neighbors that were asking my parents at church what the hell I was doing and this was on a state highway nonetheless, that I did this on. everything started to melt away and you saw beautiful strips. And that next spring in 2014, yes, we'd tiled a portion of the farm, but the entire farm looked, it never had looked as good as what it did after having that cover crop get established and then coming in and stripping it as far as how the corn looked the next year. And I made the decision, my dad retired, he had enough after the spring of 2013. He decided to retire at 62 and turn the operation, or part of the operation, about 300 acres over to me. And I made the commitment that this is how I'm going to farm from now on, that I'm the boss. And we've been 100% cover crop and then strip till as well. So in my locality, I'm definitely not commonplace. I'm one of 3 farmers, I think, in Winnebago County, Iowa, that utilizes strip till and cover crop on 100% of our acres. There's definitely more that have joined in, but not at the level that what a couple of us are at here. So the farm, there's been a lot of things that I've learned along the way. Has it always been easy? If you're new, and I don't know how many people are relatively new to this space. Are there any people that are here? Thad, you're new. Yeah, okay, so there's a couple of you. So, is it easy doing this stuff? Especially when I got into it, there weren't a lot of others doing it, and so there's a lot of fear of judgment. I've kind of just become completely immune to that. But there's definitely bad days. This was a bad day about 2.5 weeks ago when I was trying to, I had a breakdown that put me into trying to strip till in the mud in November, and this is what it looks like. And every day we were cleaning this rig off by hand with screwdrivers, trying to get it so that these baskets wouldn't bind up so that we could keep making strips. So this is an example of a bad day. I've had days where we've had strips blow out from heavy rainfall events. It happened in 2013. It also happened in the deluge that we had this year in 2014. I've had issues with the cover crops, hurting, especially in dry years, negatively impacting the crop. But it's never been as bad as what I thought it was going to be. And the lesson that I've learned over is that I would never go back to the old way of doing things from what I have seen and the advantages on how our ground has changed. And my dad, back here in this picture, I don't even know that I should even go and talk about this stuff anymore because he's a better salesman. He was the naysayer, and now if you talk to him, you can't hardly get away from him because all he talks about is his worms and his organic matter on the ground. So it's been a lot of fun. Now, a lot of if you're a new guy to this space, the neighbors or maybe your folks, how would you fare in a wet year? I can't remember if Adam talked about it or if it was in Ray Archuleta's thing. So 2024, we were definitely wet. So this is an aerial shot of Forest City, Iowa, which is just south of where I live, and this shows you some of the lakes. Now we didn't have lakes like what Mankato would. We were, I would say, kind of on the outside of the apocalyptic stuff that we had up here in southern Minnesota. We had about 20 to 25 inches of rain between April 25th when we finished planting and the 4th of July. So, but what I wanted to do was, in about the middle of July, I was starting to see some pretty good differences between my fields and how we manage things with our system versus the neighbors. And at the same point, is everyone here familiar with the 40B sustainable aviation fuel? So it was about that time that the announcement came out that in order to be eligible for corn going into sustainable aviation fuel, they had to be produced underneath no-till, strip-till management with cover crops and enhanced nitrogen management. And the outcry from the ag industry groups, you would have thought somebody would have shot and killed your firstborn over the assertion that type of practice could be expected to do well and that it would work in enough areas. So what I did was I just went out and I literally went to every one of my fields and just took side-by-side shots of what our fields looked like. So, and I labeled them really, I put this actually out with a tweet. So 40B compliant, this would be my side of the fence, and because I skipped a row here for the first section, so that's how you can tell it's mine. And then 40B non-compliant. It doesn't show up as much with the lighting. I don't know if there's a way to shut that off. But anyway, this field was a field of corn on corn. This was with all fall nitrogen and then a little bit of spring. And then this was, my system would be P and K down in the fall and then come back with a third of my nitrogen on the planter and then the other 2/3 with the side dress. So that's the first comparison. Again, this is the fence line right here. This is my corn off to the side. This is the neighbor's corn. The neighbor's nitrogen program and management was conventional tillage, fall anhydrous with spring field cultivation pass. This is an interesting comparison because both sides of the fence here, my neighbor and I, this is incredibly poorly drained. There's actually a problem with the county main that we're still trying to get rectified. This was fall hog manure followed with 32% in the spring. And then this was mine over here. Not perfect. I still had spots that had to be replanted. I still have a pond back here, but the overall health of the field was substantially better. This was not my field. This is one in Faribault County. To the left here, you can see 40B compliant management versus the status quo on the non-compliant side. And then last but not least, this is probably my favorite one. My field right here, this is directly across the road on a blacktop. This field was the best looking cornfield in our neighborhood when the corn came out of the ground. This was worked to a fine dust. They planted it. It came out of the ground with a full shot of 32 underneath it. It was the best looking corn. It made my cornfield look embarrassing. But then, a month and a half later, this was the difference. So why do I put this up here? I put it up here because I think there's a lot of people that assert that doing these things is a threat to production. And from what I've witnessed in my experience over time, that's really kind of a misnomer. So where my farm is today, just to share some of the numbers, this is my strip till rig. You really can't see it, but I put covers on my cedars right here. I put covers on while I strip. I've got an 8-row Kraus Gladiator. I farm about 1,200 acres of corn and soybeans, so relatively small in the grand scheme of things. I 100% fall strip till and covers since 2014. All of my nutrients are row indexed, so meaning everything is either directly under where the roots are going to be, or in the case of my nitrogen, it's applied just in time. Like I said, 1/3 with the planter and 2/3 with side dress. Since we started this in 2011, we've soil sampled a couple times. The increase that we've seen on average across the farm is about 0.9% so far. We're up to soil test again next fall, I think. So, some people claim that, they'll grow it in 5 or 6 years. I don't know if that's physically possible or if you just have to have livestock, but I'm happy with this. And this is the thing my dad is really happy about. He likes the idea of his assets increasing not only in monetary value, but qualitative value as well. And we've had, since I took over, about a 15% increase in our APH. And I'm not attributing that all to soil health. I wouldn't say that because there's been genetic gains that have come along. But when I was in the seed business, I looked at a lot of yield data. I had a pretty good idea on where yields and production was. And I sure didn't want to be taking a back seat to anybody. You really can't in a commodity business. And so I feel like with where we're at, we're probably in the upper 25% quadrant and I don't have to be the top because I'm going for things beyond yield. I want to take care of the ground. I want to minimize the external costs of the farm. All that stuff's important to me. So anyway, advice for newbies that are here for the first time or haven't maybe made the full transition to things. Find your Sheldon. Find somebody local that you can trust and leech onto them and ask questions and be vulnerable and learn from people that have done it already. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. The second thing is build consensus. I basically performed a coup d'etat on my parents. Now in hindsight, it worked out really well, but it was prone for problems. I've seen other people do it that way too, where dad is not on board. And a lot of times it can lead to people either splitting up the operation or it just doesn't go well and they don't stick with it. So build consensus with all of the people in the operation. In my opinion, it's part of the reason why being a owner-operator by yourself is a lot easier way to do this rather than having a dad and 2 uncles and a cousin. It becomes a lot more difficult the more people that you have involved with that. So this slide is already outdated after the news that came out this morning. So the third line is do it for the long-term resilience of your farm. Don't do it because of the thought of some stupid carbon credit payment. And I've changed my tune on this. I used to be really excited about those programs or the idea of 45Z payments. I don't know if you saw the wire this morning that came across on Twitter, but the Biden administration punted on releasing 45Z requirements. It was my opinion after the election that was probably dead anyway, but it sounds like that's probably a thing. So if you were banking on a $300 an acre tax credit for how you farm, that's probably not going to work out. So, or for NRCS money, and I've taken advantage of all this stuff, but you should be convinced that you should put the work in, spend a 50 to 100 hours of doing the homework to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons instead of something that can be taken away that you're going to be disappointed with if those were your motivation or motivative forces. And the last one that goes along with the picture here is burn the ships. So if you're, if you're farming with somebody that has, or if you have conventional equipment, the best thing to do to eliminate going backwards, sell the field cultivator, sell the ripper, get rid of anything that is tempting, because there'll be many times in the first 5 years where you are tempted to reach for those tools to make you feel better. But all you're going to do is set yourself back instead of learn how to manage through this stuff. And that's one of the most important things. It didn't happen instantly for me. It took about, my dad still thinks I'm going to fail. He still worries about me after doing this for I don't know how many years now. But it took, I think, about 5 or 6 years before we sold the field cultivator. I think he still keeps a couple of the plows. I think he's got a couple back in the Grove yet. But we don't have anything that we would use in mass. So get rid of the temptations to go back to the old way. Like I said, I have zero regrets in the changes that we've made. And honestly, I would quit farming if I wasn't doing these practices. That's how convinced and passionate I am about this stuff. I'd rather just not do it, because when I look at the majority of the acres that I drove by on the way up to Mankato today, it just wouldn't make me want to farm. I think this stuff is far more interesting to be in this space. So before I transfer to the second, any questions on anything I've covered on like my farming background up to this point, things I've learned, lessons, any questions about stuff like that while I take a drink of water?
So did 45Z actually die this morning?
Yes.
It's done.
Unless the Trump administration takes it up.
I didn't know if that was actually.
I don't know.
I've heard enough rumors, but you said it came out this morning.
I saw it. I'd gotten a text about it about 11 o'clock, and I checked Twitter, and I saw that it said they had decided not to release anything. And me reading between the tea leaves with some of the appointments that have been made, it doesn't look very friendly to that space. So.
Question related, but I hadn't heard that. So.
Yeah, but I'll be the first to admit, a year ago I was really gung-ho about it, because I finally thought, I've been doing this, I'm finally going to get a reward for it. But it seemed, the lesson learned is, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is when it comes to this space. And that's why the resiliency that we have built into the operation, and we've taken out the lack of, we've taken out the variability that my dad had way more. In the last 10 years, this was the first year I had any type of replant situation. And before that, I didn't have to replant anything when neighbors did. So it works. I guess that's the bottom line. It works if you buy in and you believe and do it. Jason?
Have you considered just doing or trying no-till and or foliar nitrogen applications?
So the question is, have I considered doing no-till and foliar N? No-till, absolutely. I would love to convert my fields that have pattern tile underneath them to do no-till, I think. And to be honest with you, I don't know why I haven't. It's something that Sheldon and I actually debate about a lot on why don't we just go no-till at that point. So I'm probably full of shit a little bit sometimes for not pushing it farther, but that would be the next step, I think, for our regular commodity operation to it. Foliar N, I've played with that stuff before, and at least in the current forms, for what I see, there's not a product that I think I can get what I need out of a foliar, so I'm going to probably stick with just trying to be judicious with the use of nitrogen. I think in this system I can be a hell of a lot more efficient on a pounds of N per bushel factor with what I'm doing. So.
You mentioned the changes you've seen. What about inputs and costs and cost savings? Have those been realized in what you've done?
I haven't sat down to compare it out. I mean, I farm. My dad was really, and this is meant to be a compliment. My dad was really, really tight. So he built a lot of his own equipment, and he kind of bred being efficient into me, and that's why strip till has really aligned well with that. So I think for what I farm with 1,200 acres, I think I have a pretty lean and mean lineup of equipment. I'm making fewer passes. I hire nothing done from custom application unless it's through an airplane. All my fertilizer I pick up and apply myself, and all of that stuff. And so I can't say that I'm X dollars an acre ahead, but when I look at my neighbors going by with a $3 million wagon train of equipment from field to field, the cost per acre, what that has to try to accomplish the same thing, I'm doing it with way less and getting the same result. So, any other one more?
Hey, just more of a comment and stuff. The burn the ships thing, I think, is a good idea. I want to switch to strip till here and getting rid of my cultivator and sold my ripper this fall. But,
Good for you.
Boy, it was sure handy when the guy didn't pick it up for a while after fixing the ruts I made this spring.
Yeah.
In that stuff, and so you got to be a little careful there, maybe, to not have some.
No, that's a great point. So, like in a year like this, I made some ruts. This is the first year I've made ruts in my fields since I've done this, and part of the part of the resilience is you get soil structure back in your field, and but it was so damn wet in a couple of the side hills, it didn't matter. There was no strength. They were completely saturated and bleeding out. So, so very minimal stuff. But so if you're going to have a ripper, have something so small that your dad or your grandpa wouldn't want to hook onto it because they were worried it would break or fall in half. Have something really shitty. That's my advice. So. Anyway, I'm going to keep moving on for the sake of time here. Yeah, I'm about right on. Okay, so the next part of what I'm going to talk about is something that's been boiling in me for a long time, something that Sheldon and Lance and I talk a lot about is in this space, are we evolving fast enough? Who thinks that the soil health movement is moving at a pace where we will have meaningful results by the end of our lifetimes? Who drove to Mankato today and felt like that looking at the landscape? Did anybody? So this is my farming partner here, Thad, and I drove up, and I had Thad drive me. When you're a speaker, you get to have a valet, and Thad's my valet. The reason I had a driver, though, is I wanted to take a census on the way up here, okay, of how many fields looked like they had any form of reduced tillage or conservation. And I did the math on the trip up. We came 66 miles. If you take a half mile on either side, that's 40,000 acres we drove by on the trip to Mankato today. So I took 40,000 acres, just for easy figuring, divided by 160 acres for a quarter section. So we drove by 250 quarters worth of fields on the way up. How many fields out of 250 would the room guess that we saw that had some semblance of soil conservation practice in it? So 2, we have 0, 5, 2, 6, 10. 10 is the winner, okay? Now, part of it's fixed because we drove by 2 of Sheldon's fields on the way up. So he stacked the deck there around Easton. But so this is my contention too, is that we are not moving fast enough. And there is a time value on what is passing, and it frustrates me to no end. And this is where I'm going to speak really candidly for the last part of the presentation about how apathetic our industry is in giving a pass to the lack of progress given the technology advances and what we know is possible in this space. So 160 years of agriculture, the stats that people cite say that we've lost a third of our topsoil. In some places that's 100% if you're on some of the hilltops that we have in northern Iowa for sure, and about half of our organic matter's gone. And if you don't believe it, all you got to do is go stand on any fence line, especially where I farm. Every fence line, when I close it up, I look at them, and you can see in a lot of cases, I have some where it's a 2 or 3 foot drop. On some of my family's ground, and my dad, my grandfather, we lost that over the last 100 years that our family's farmed. This is a tile inlet, or a tile outlet dumping into a ditch. Why is all the water completely brown? This was from I think late May, early June this year. Are tiles supposed to look like that, dumping into a river? It's because there's surface drains where you get saturated and there's nowhere for things to go, so it takes the soil with it. And this dumped out in the ditch, and 300 feet later it was in the Winnebago River heading to the Mississippi. So too much of that stuff. This is a video I shot on my morning run, a half mile from my house. We had this type of a rainfall event about 4 or 5 times in early June. And this is what was running off a chisel plowed field, cultivated field. and the best part's coming. You come down here and you see what it looks like running directly into Lime Creek, which goes into the Winnebago River in a couple miles. That field had 100% of its nitrogen on early, okay? It probably had a good, half, 2/3 rate of herbicide. And there it goes, whoosh. And what consequence is there in our system for a guardrail to do anything about that other than to make a snide tweet about it on Twitter, right? So not much. So we have an external cost in the system. It ends up screwing somebody, and it ends up screwing the fishermen that are in the Gulf with the zone of hypoxia here that is a result of our agriculture in the Midwest. We also have these really rare or really common occurrences now called dust storms in the spring. And a lot of people say, well, what are you going to do? You can't help that the wind blows. Well, you can help how you manage the land. And this has external costs as well. So this was May of 2023 on I-55 in the state of Illinois. It was, I don't know how many, 100-car pileup, and I think 9 people died, including like 1 or 2 kids, I think, in this thing. And, it was sited back to an area of the interstate where they had gone out and used a high-speed disc to prepare the seed bed and work it to a pulp. And big surprise, what's going to happen when the wind blows 55 miles an hour? We know these things, but we do them anyway because they're fast and easy, and that's what we've evolved into as an industry. So our external costs that happen in our systems are not on the ledger. Nobody is accounting for these things, and that's why nobody is taking this stuff seriously. So voluntary progress, the status of how that's worked out for coming hat in hand with our neighbors or expecting people to do the right thing. So I'm going to talk about the nutrient reduction strategy, and some of you are probably familiar with this. This is something that came out in 2008 as the Mississippi watershed trying to reduce the load of phosphorus and nitrogen in the Gulf by 45%, or the rivers by 45%. They came out where they worked with industry and academics and soil scientists to come up with a matrix of the practices that you could put on your farm to help achieve those numbers. And in that matrices, there was switching your nitrogen from fall to spring. There was tillage, and then the number one thing was the introduction of cover crops. That was what they led with in 2008. So over in 2009, the base case for cover crop use in the state of Iowa was 10,000 acres, so not very many, okay? Since 2009, in 2023, it's reported that we had about 3.8 million acres of cover crop. And if you go to our promotion boards, corn growers, soybean board, Farm Bureau, renewable fuels, they will say, look, folks, Iowa farmers love the land. We 380x the use of cover crops in the state. How wonderful, how much love there is. But when you drive from Des Moines to the Minnesota border, you see one green field in the state of Iowa this time of the year, and it's the guy that's presenting tomorrow, Landon Plagge. He's the only guy along I-35 that has a green field, okay? So it sounds like we're doing a lot in that case, but when you put it in the context that we have 23 million acres, and that 3.8 million acres only represents 16% of the land. And then you think about what percentage of these cover crops that were seeded, of the 3.8 million, what percentage did farmers voluntarily pay for that out of their own pocket? And what percentage was provided by somebody else? And if that government money or money from Pepsi or Unilever went away, how many farmers would care enough to do those things, to be stewards, to keep using this practice on their farm? I would guess it's probably 80 or 90% is paid for by somebody else. And so if we keep up on this track, even though we 380x'd, at the annual rate of return, that's only about 1.14% a year in change, even with the government paying for a majority of it. So it's only 60 more years until we get to 85% adoption, which a lot of people would say we would actually have meaningful change on the external cost on our landscape. So what are the chances that this just improves on its own? How many were in Adam Lash's presentation last time? Yeah, that was fantastic. Second time I've seen that talk. He touched on a lot of the things about the demographics that are approaching us. Do we think with the current trajectory, do we think farms are going to get smaller right now or larger? And how many large BTO operations that are farming, say, 20 to 50,000 acres in the I states, how many of them are using soil health practices across 100%. Does anybody know of examples of that? Yeah. So, and then you have the obsession where the industry is going with speed farming, high-speed planters, high-speed discs. Give us autonomous operations so that we don't have to get immigrant labeler to come in because we can't find anybody else. Give us autonomy. We want to have simple operations to go fast. We're just not moving. And then I said, it's funny, the 45Z things, because I was alluding to that when I had the shifting government policy priorities. All of these things are moving away from this. So it's my contention, if I could be king for a day and be Elon with the Doge dog on my shoulder, I'm actually really excited about the idea of Elon coming into some of these spaces and hopefully shaking up. So what I did was, if I was Elon, I put together how I would address this to actually get meaningful change to an 85% level of sustainable farming practices. I don't care if you call it conservation or regenerative or just something better than the crap that we have now. How do we achieve that and get that on 85% of the acres? So the policy that I'm putting forward here, it's a three-legged stool. And if you don't do all three of these things, the stool falls over. So the first item that I'm going to talk about is crop insurance reform. Second item is landowner skin in the game. And the last one is transitional encouragement for farmers. I'm going to try to speed through this so we have time for discussion and questions here. So crop insurance reform, how would I fix it? Okay. 90% of farmers carry multi-peril crop insurance, okay? And why do we do it? Because farming's super risky and we're dealing with a lot of money and we need to have something to back us up. It's hard to get financing unless you have that backing. The taxpayer pays roughly about 63% of our crop insurance premium with no strings attached, other than the promise of a cheap and dependable food supply. That's all they get back in that. So what I would say is, if we have external costs like dust storms killing people on I-55 or hypoxic zones, it's kind of silly for the taxpayer to subsidize our crop insurance policies that prop up the practices that allow that type of farming to happen, and then expect them to clean up the costs on the backside as well. So how do you fix that? You make the subsidy that you're earning from the taxpayer based off the practices that actually can benefit land and society in turn. So, if you, and this could be an a la carte thing, you could choose your practices. It won't be a mandate that says you have to do all three of these things. But if you want to earn a 63% subsidy like what we have, you're going to have use a whole litany of things, okay? We could set this up with regional metrics by agronomists and soil scientists, because we know you couldn't have a federal policy across the board because every area is a little bit different, all right? But we could set up metrics similar to like what they had in the nutrient reduction strategy to back this up. And the best thing about this is that it still would be voluntary to participate. If you think this is all hogwash and this shouldn't apply to you and you're not gonna be able to raise a crop if you have to use some of these practices, that's fine. You can do it, you're just gonna pay, say $90 to $100 an acre for your crop insurance, all right? And if you want to use those practices that are going to actually potentially benefit the land and society as well as your own farm, that's the one thing we don't talk about. When those losses run off the farm or blow off, we're losing money. And nobody looks at it through that spectrum, which is just absolutely insane to me. So for the naysayers, you don't have to participate. You're just going to internalize the external costs that we have in the system here. So the next pillar of the stool is landowners with skin in the game and a land and water quality use tax. So you can't just put it all on the farmer. You have to have landlords that are going to care about this. So it's more than just getting your $500 an acre check on the 1st of March. The owners need to not be absentee, inherited the farm through 2 generations and have no connection to what's happening out on their property. So you do this really quick by having the practices used by either the owner-operator or the tenant determine the taxation level. Again, you set the same requirements around the crop insurance subsidies so it's easy to administer and coherent. And the tax proceeds are used for funding the cleanup costs of the external costs, if you don't want to abide by these things and produce more videos like what I show with the soil and the water running into the river like it does. The last one is the one that's probably going to rub some people the wrong way, but I think Adam hit on it already. We need to have policy that encourages transitional action, okay? Geriatric farm control is a handicap. And I say this with respect because you know, there's a lot of wisdom, you know, that the older generation has. But when people, you know, with the technology advancements we've had, technology allows people to farm forever now. It's really, really easy to have an ass massaging seat and in a John Deere tractor until you're 85 years old and not let your son or daughter plant corn until they're 60 years old. It's just too easy to happen. So what I would suggest is that when people become 62 years of age and they can draw from Social Security, you're no longer able to get any subsidies from the government in any shape or form unless you're adopting conservation practices and or transitioning to a young farmer doing the same. So those are the 3 pillars. And it's not that I want government to come in. The older I've gotten, the less big government I've definitely become. But why can't we fix it without the government? Because we haven't so far. We've had ultimate freedom to make these choices. There isn't anybody saying we have to farm the way that we do. But we do it for a lot of reasons that aren't necessarily good, okay? And the other reason we can't fix it is because the current system does not have the external negative costs on the ledger. Nobody has that figured out into any of the math. And the last reason is the opportunity cost of doing nothing in perpetuity for the next 60 years, hoping on things, it can't be repaid. We can't have a do-over. We can't go back and, it takes, 500 years to make an inch of soil. We can't get back the losses that we're accruing here. And so we need broad sweeping legislative activity that I think needs to go into. It's probably too late for something like this to get in the Farm Bill, but in the next version, we need to have policy put forward to put a stop and draw a line and force people to come to the reality that these things have value. The idea that we're going to convince farmers to farm like Joel Salatin if they're not willing to see that, they're not willing to see water infiltration changes by stopping tillage, it's just not going to happen unless we give a kind of a first base, second base, third base approach to coming to this soil health. It's easier for people in this room because we understand and know about it. For a lot of people, it's like talking to somebody on Mars. So we have to have baby steps and we have to have a stopgap to minimize the loss that we have nationally with our soils. So I'm going to close with this slide, kind of in that same spirit. We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And, I'm 45 years old, and I think a lot more about my dad always said, leave things in a better place than you found them, I guess. And I think about this quote all the time and kind of what it means and why I come and make time to do talks like this is to kind of spread this message and make people think. If you disagree with me and what I put forward today, I welcome the conversation of what we're going to have next. Q&A, if you want to talk over a whiskey, I'm happy to do that. If you agree with me, we need to amplify these voices. I think there probably will be some agreement here, but take this stuff out. Talk to your corn growers, talk to your Farm Bureau people, talk to your local legislatures to give them the impotence to put some of this wild stuff forward, because it does make a difference. I traveled to DC last spring, got to talk with Cory Booker and John Tester on the Ag Committee, and that was one of the things they say the most, that voices do matter, even in this cynical corporate control society. And if it comes from out of the mouth of farmers, it will mean significantly more. So that's my ask, that's my message for today. I'm going to shut up, and hopefully we can have some conversation here and talk questions and debate some of this stuff. So.